This is Fortress on a Hill with Henry, Danny, Kagan, Jovanni, Shiloh, Manisha, and Mike.
Welcome, everyone, to Fortress on the Hill, a podcast about U.S. foreign policy, anti-imperialism, skepticism, and the American way of war. I'm Jovanni, your host. Thank you for joining us today. With me is my co-host, Henry. Henry, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right, man. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. Today, we're diving into one of the most pressing and polarizing issues of our time, the crisis and politics of immigration. It's a story that stretches across centuries and continents, shaped by war, exploitation, and the relentless movement of people in search of safety, opportunity, and a better life. Consider this. According to Brown University's Cost of War Project, the U.S. post 9/11 wars alone displaced an estimate of 38 million people, and some estimates reaching as high as 60 million. That's more than any conflict since World War II. These staggering numbers are a stark reminder of how conflict and foreign policy decisions ripples across the globe, driving mass migration. But the roots of this crisis run even deeper. From the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the first U.S. law to explicitly bar immigration based on race, to the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, which introduced quotas that disproportionately restricted migration from Mexican and Central America. The U.S. has long played a role in shaping who is allowed to cross its border. And as Aviva Chomsky argued in her book, Undocumented, How Immigration Became Illegal, the very concept of illegal immigration is relatively recent invention tied to economic demands and political agendas. Meanwhile, the global movement of people in the 21st century has become a defining phenomenon, whether driven by economic inequalities, climate change, or the legacies of colonialism and exploitation, as Walter Rooney outlined in his book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Millions are forced to leave their homes, often with nowhere to go. Instead of addressing the root causes, we see xenophobia, hysteria, and scapegoating take center stage, especially during election seasons. Politicians compete with each other to see who can be tougher on immigration, while the sensationalist press fuels fears and division. But what if we pause and ask, how did we get here in the first place? And what role did we have in creating this global phenomenon? In this episode, we'll explore the context of political forces that have shaped immigration policy, the human cost of displacement, and the complicity of nations like the United States in perpetrating this crisis. From the Bracero program to Operation Wetback, from NAFTA to the Border Patrol, we'll trace the threads that connect past and present and ask what it means to live in a world where borders are fortified, but the causes of migration are never addressed. Here to join us to unpack this crisis and politics of immigration, we're joined by three young activists on the front lines of migrant justice: Cynthia Rodriguez, Juana Guzman Mata, and Maxine Rebles. Cynthia is a dedicated organizer based in Chicago and the national organizer with Mi Gente, a political home for Chicano and Latino communities across the United States and Puerto Rico. Juana is a master's student at the University of North Texas, working toward becoming the mental health counselor, and has been involved in immigrant rights from 2011 throughout the fight for DACA, where she was a student at the University of Texas, Austin, Texas. Maxine Rebles, I'll let Maxine Rebles introduce herself. Yeah, we're joined by three young activists on the front lines of migrant justice: Cynthia Rodriguez, Mata, and Maxine Robles. Cynthia is a dedicated organizer based in Chicago and a national organizer with Mi Gente, a political home and national hub for Chicano and Latino communities across the United States and Puerto Rico. At Mi Gente, she leads the impactful No Tech for ICE campaign. With a rich background in grassroots activism, Cynthia previously served as organizing director for Centro de Trabajadores Unidos, advocating for low-wage immigrant workers in Chicago's southeast side and south suburbs. He's also the local organizer with Umui Ethnic Studies and has worked as a community educator and interfaith organizer. Juana is a master's student at the University of North Texas, working towards becoming a mental health counselor. Juana became involved in the movement for immigrant rights in 2011 throughout the fight for DACA, where she was a student at the University of Texas, Austin. Juana has worked as a legal assistant, case manager, community organizer in the immigrant and Latina communities, advocating for immigration relief policies, fighting deportations, and anti-immigrant laws, and engaging in community efforts to increase Latinas' political involvement. Maxine Rebles is a Navy veteran, former teacher, and a local activist. Ladies, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to join all the amazing Texas organizers on here today.
I'm doing well as well. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
So, talk to us a little bit of what you do.
I can start. It's really great to be here. I am joining from far away. I'm in Chicago, where it snowed. Finally, the sun is out today. I miss Texas sunsets, but I get to support and organize alongside our members and folks in Texas every once in a while because I'm a part of Mi Gente. So I'm a national organizer with Mi Gente right now. Mi Gente, as you shared, Jovanni, is a national Latino and Chicano organization that talks about our work as the work of both an organizing hub and a political home. And that's because roots are precisely in the work of deportation defense, of folks really harnessing the power of community and publicly defending themselves and each other through the Not One More Deportation campaign. And from that work, people throughout the country and organizations really realizing that there was a gap at the national level for Latino people on the left at that scale. And so that's how Mi Gente is born. Mi Gente is with a J. A lot of people tell us, you're spelling it wrong. I'm like, I know, but it's on purpose. It's a J for justice because we believe that's the work. And we believe that by coming together, that's how we make change and get justice for our people. And Mi Gente has members both in the US and Puerto Rico, and we've been around for 10 years now. This is Mi Gente's 10-year anniversary. At Mi Gente, I coordinate our No Tech for ICE work, which I can talk about later, but is one of the ways in which, as you were talking about, we take on this larger web and octopus that is immigration in this country. So that's a little bit about where I'm at, what we do, and I'm so excited because before I was a staff person at Mi Gente, I was a member, and I'm joining 2 other Mi Gente members who are also doing amazing work outside of and within Mi Gente.
Ray, anyone else care to join and share with us a little bit of what you do?
Yeah, I can share. Like Cynthia said, I'm also a Mi Gente member, and previously, a couple years ago, I was also part of the staff. I was an organizer with Mi Gente. Once you step into that role, you never really stop. So I continue to carry those learnings with me, even in the different spheres I find myself in now. I am working towards a master's degree in mental health as a therapist and hoping to work with immigrant communities. It's a very much needed role, especially with immigrant and Latina populations. So hoping to work there. I also currently work with stateless individuals as a case manager. So I've been getting just a firsthand feel of what people are like, the fears that people are having right now, especially when it comes to immigration policy. There are many times, especially like you were saying right now, where immigrants are used in just very for political gains or in all kinds of ways. And I get to really be there with people as they're experiencing it and going through it, in particular with individuals who are immigrants, but also stateless, so do not have a nationality. And that there's been a lot of concerns right now. What does that look like for someone who's stateless to be detained? Where are they deported if they were to be deported? So many questions that we're just getting around. But yeah, that's currently where I'm at and what I'm doing.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Maxine.
So right now I'm working on doing like a watch party because Jasmine Crockett's going to be having it on the 20th with 3 different lawyers. And they had reached out because they're going to be talking about undocumented veterans. So that's one of the big things that I'm working on, trying to convince people to advocate for these undocumented veterans. What got me into it was growing up, we didn't realize that we were poor because no one really talks to us about it. So I joined the Navy right after 9/11. And it was a real eye-opener to learn one, that you're poor and no one should be living like this because it's not normal. And two, how policed our city is, how we're brainwashed into thinking all this stuff when we don't. You're used to looking up at the walls in history class and not seeing yourself at all in those white men. But you don't really think about that stuff. When they murdered my twin brother, I became a teacher to try and stop other young people and families from going through the same cycles that we had been through. I felt like he had fallen through the cracks and nobody cared. Inside that institution, you start seeing all these problems, but everyone is just really compliant and don't really see it. You start feeling like you're in the twilight zone. This last year, I had a mediation class, which is basically teaching these kids how to love themselves, showing them that their parents are human beings with feelings, emotions, and the stress of the world on their shoulders. So what they say and scream at them is not their fault, that they feel their sense of worth and start building up that strength within themselves. This past summer, they were telling me that they were going to take that class away and wanted me to teach history because of funding. I did not want to lie to these kids, talking about Christopher Columbus and all this shit. I couldn't do that. And that was a shifting point for me. Do you comply and do what you know is wrong? Or do you put your foot down and see what more you can do to stop cycles like you promised yourself you were going to do, right? But being around these teachers, some of them so compliant, you start to think that you're wrong. So when the contract with Mihen came up to go on tour with the Chisme tour, I thought that was a sign. I told them, no, I resign. I'm taking this 3-month contract to see what is going on. And going around to the different cities, the different states, filled me with so much emotion. I'm not crazy. There's something wrong and we need to fix it. So that's why now, even with the veterans not seeing where I'm coming from, trying to support these undocumented veterans, I know this is where I need to be. Even if nobody stands with us, we're going to be doing the right thing.
Thank you, Maxine. Thank you for sharing. It's very important work that all three of you do. And just for the listeners here, we have 2 Texans and Cynthia, you coming out of Chicago, right? Thank you all three for joining us. So I want to ask you, how's it been like this last few days or the last few weeks since the second Trump administration came on board and this wave of ICE raids happened shortly after his inauguration all across the country? What's it like in your area? How did you see it?
Like for us, I'm in Laredo, so we're right close to the border. My house is like 10, 15 minutes away from the border. We have the National Guard here, so that was normal for us. But we also have the Border Patrol. They got more handsy or territorial now. One of my friends who would go jogging right by the river because his house was there, now he's been getting stopped more frequently. He's been videotaping or recording that stuff. Think that they have all this right, but our community is in such a need. If they have all this money to waste on something that we don't need, like Laredo is one of the 10 safest top cities like in the US. Like there's no reason to spend another $1 billion or whatever it is to send more troops over here. We don't need them, but nobody sees that. I had a student, because they're scared, there was no protocols for schools, when shit hit the fan, and they don't understand. Like, they think it's just black and white. This student is in the process of getting the papers. Feel so close to finalizing this stuff. And now he's going to turn 18. If he turns 18, he has to start all over again. They're scared. Now they have to live in fear, and they don't understand that. These aren't criminals. He was a really good student. People don't understand. We have the Know Your Rights, and the family's coming. They're scared. There's so much uncertainty, and they think it's black and white, but there's so much gray.
Yeah, it does stoke fear in people, even people that are residents, because the rhetoric is so powerful. The rhetoric is so intimidating and so terrorizing. I've known people that avoid driving the highway to go to work because it's a high risk of getting detained. So they would rather drive through the towns or through the cities to get to work, and they just won't go on the highway. I've heard of teachers intimidating children about that, and kids just terrorize the fact that they might go home and their parents are there, or one of their parents are there. It's a very terrorizing feeling.
Yeah, it's been an incredibly chaotic time. And to Maxine's point, this narrative of public safety is really important because everything that's happening is being sold under the name of public safety. People who are watching the news and thinking about what's going on need to ask themselves, public safety for who? Because it's not public safety for everyone. I'll talk a little bit about Chicago just because of what's been happening right now with the attacks on sanctuary cities. But I'll take a step back by saying I think where we can learn the most right now and where we should have been looking for the past several months and year should have been Texas. I'm sure the Texas compañeras can share more, but a lot of policies and tools and technologies used by ICE are first deployed in Texas, and we should really be learning from the incredible organizing that's happening there. What we're seeing in Chicago is a foil of what's happening in a blue city, right? This narrative around sanctuary cities, what's supposed to be these usually more liberal, more blue cities where folks have organized really hard to have protections that limit information sharing between ICE and local law enforcement, or that limit the actual collaboration between local police and ICE, apart from information sharing. And that even before the inauguration, this was put out as these cities are like public enemy number one, and they became the top of the target list for the early rounds of raids that were announced. And if anything, we've just seen the kind of immigration system that we have now growing and being passed down from one president to another. And that also means that the organizing and the kinds of resistance that our communities have done are also being passed down over the years. And so I say that to say that Chicago, as well as in other places, people have been preparing for this. People have been creating strong rapid response teams, or as Maxine is sharing, making sure that people have the kinds of trainings, know your rights materials that they need. When raids happened in Chicago, folks were out sharing information, showing up to schools, and making sure that people were backed up as much as possible. And so now you have a Trump administration that is having people in ICE fired because they haven't been meeting these numbers that they had. And you even have so-called border czar Tom Homan saying that people are too educated about their rights, and that it's not so much know your rights, but that people know how to evade arrest. So, people are organizing.
Yeah, I think the cities that came out when they initially did the raids were New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Phoenix, San Diego, Denver, Miami, and Atlanta. Am I missing anyone that they initially announced? Those were right.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah, I've definitely seen our local organizations sharing information about local ICE sightings. There has been an increase in activity, but it's also been just really confusing. And I think that's the point, in that there's vehicles that are seen that are presumed to be ICE, but it's just really hard to tell. And I think that's the point, to create this chaos of confusion, like Cynthia was mentioning. That's part of the tactic, to instill fear so that people are taking it seriously or seeing Trump as this all powerful presence in our lives in a lot of ways. This is not new in Texas either. I think that I'm not gonna pretend or say, oh no, before the Trump administration, everything was great. Because in Texas, it has never really been a welcoming state for immigrants. There have been many policies that were in place before that focus on targeting immigrants, like the 287G agreement, which still exists here in Tarrant County between the sheriff, Tarrant County jail, and ICE. Those sort of things. ICE activity has always been present here. It's just that right now it's really hard to know, oh, is that car ICE, or are they undercover? Like, what should I believe in? And that is part of the tactic. Like you mentioned, there's also the whole teachers situation. This made national headlines because it came out of Fort Worth. Sadly, not surprising to me, but very sadly, the substitute teacher went on to tag ICE on Twitter saying, hey, come to Northside High School because we have a lot of students here who don't even speak English. Something that is unfortunately not uncommon here in Fort Worth. It makes the news when everyone's already paying attention. Because it's already been a hot topic, it really got picked up, and I believe there was a whole investigation by the ISD board, and hopefully the teacher hasn't returned. We've had teachers in the past here make controversy because they're trying to target students to be reported to ICE. It happens during any time, especially right now when they know that it's out in the community and just trying to see who they can get. It's just really wild. Like Cynthia mentioned, people are rising up everywhere. We are really seeing who's with us. We had a day without immigrants, and I saw some local businesses stand up and say, we're closing that day in support of the community. That to me was very telling. You have big corporations turning people into ice, and then you have local businesses saying, no, we're going to stand by a community and acknowledge who makes the economy run. And it's really immigrant work. And so that's been really amazing to see, is people who are taking a stand. And if they don't, then they know what the consequences will be, because people are ready to make that known. The other thing is also the Know Your Rights. The church that my parents go to hosted a whole Know Your Rights during the mass service. And I thought that was really interesting. So it's telling me that people are taking it seriously. Even institutions like the church are really taking this seriously and trying to get information out to people as much as possible. Tom Homan was saying about people being educated. We know that, and we're seeing the consequences of that, which is great.
It's interesting because the contradictions here in Texas, at least, Texas is a Latino majority state. I believe it was like 7% of the Texas population is Latino origin. And with that brings anxiety, just like you said about people speaking Spanish, and just bring anxiety. And with that also brings this complication of identity, right? Because although it's a Latino majority state, there are divisions and there are schism in identity, whereas some call themselves Tejano, some call themselves Mexican Americans. So that brings a lot of complications to the culture here in Texas. But one of the things that I notice here as well is that when we talk about immigration, migration, rarely there's a topic of why is it happening. Just like I mentioned in my intro, has seen the largest migration of people since the Second World War, displaced people just moving, and never really, like the media, the politicians, never really pretty much addressed the issue of why people are moving. The majority of the time, people are moving because of their policies. And just like we talked about in the intro, I talked about NAFTA. One of the things that NAFTA did is pretty much open the economy of Mexico, right, with the United States, and the North Atlantic Agreement with Mexico, United States, and Canada, and they pretty much opened the economy that we call the free economy. Really, what we're talking about, the economy of corporations, the transnational, right? There they have the freedom of moving capital back and forth, not people, right? Just capital back and forth. One of the things that happened in Mexico is that used to be autosufficient, the production of corn. Corn is a major staple of the Mexican diet, and Mexico grew their own corn. But with NAFTA, when agribusiness came into Mexico, they were pretty much pushed out. They were bought out, pushed out. A lot just ended up migrating to the cities of Mexico looking for work because they lost their land and ranches for the big agribusiness. A lot of things like that is now, and now Mexico, for example, buy corn. Once it was a producer of corn, right, it was autosufficient, now buys corn from American corporations. Anyone want to comment on that?
I'll just share that that's exactly why my family migrated. My parents were farm workers in Mexico, and we just couldn't survive on what they were earning. It wasn't that, yeah, it's a fun thing to do to migrate, or that you can really choose to do that your whole life in that country. And for us, it was just a really big loss, and had to go through the whole process of just grieving a way of life that we didn't really want to give up willingly, but felt forced to move. And I think that speaks to the push-pull factors, and how the NAFTA agreement really forced a lot of people into migration, and in this situation in the first place, that now we're facing these consequences. So people who have been living for 30 plus years but haven't been able to get on a path to citizenship because there just isn't one. Like you said, it's been easier to transport goods, capital, but not people. And so that's what's led us into this situation of having people who don't have a status, because that hasn't been the priority. It hasn't been that. It's been just the capital and the focus on making money off of that, but without giving us something in return.
Yeah. In the same token, Americans also have been affected by this transnational global capitalism phenomenon that we're seeing with free trade and all that, with the auto industry. I went to Detroit a few years back. Detroit used to be the fourth largest city in the United States in the 90s, when the auto companies moved to either Canada or Mexico for assembly. Millions of people had to leave Detroit. When I went there, you saw dilapidated homes everywhere. You saw a lot of homelessness. You hardly even see police because the budget was so stringent in Detroit that they didn't have money to pay the a police or fire department. So one of the things I was told that there are a lot of fires happening in Detroit because people will go into these abandoned homes to try to stay warm in the winter, and you start these fires, and they didn't have in the city budget to pay for a lot of these fire departments and stuff like that. And that was going back to what you were saying, Juana, about how your family was affected. Here in the United States, people were affected as well. And this brings to a lot of anxiety among people here. A friend of mine from central US, I think it was Nebraska, he was telling me about the meatpacking industry, where at one point used to be in the cities. And then those meatpacking moved out into the outskirts, they moved out into the rural areas, right? And a lot of times they moved out to towns where they had a population roughly around 3, 4, or 5,000 people, real small populations. And then overnight, these sleepy towns saw an influx of migrant going to work in those meatpacking factories. They were transported there to work on these meatpacking factories. These small towns saw a duplication of their population where they didn't have infrastructure to support the amount of people. So that brought a lot of anxiety among the local people from other places, brown people or whatnot, or Asian people came from other places to work into that town. So that created a lot of rifts amongst the local people and the new arriving migrants. And plus the politicians pretty much will feed off of that because the cities didn't have the infrastructure to support those amount of people. So that brought a lot of frustrations and anxiety on people. Cynthia, how do you see that affecting the migration as far as migrants coming, leaving their family, breaking families and whatnot, and also the working class people in the United States, where they clash, with those interests clash? How do you see that?
Yeah, that's a great question. At the end of the day, what does it mean to pit working class people against working class people, indigenous people against indigenous people, and who wins, right? And I think your point and your framing around what does this mean on an international level is so important. And I think there has to be things that give us hope in these next 4 years. And one of them has to be what's beyond our belly button here in the US. And that's going to have to be adapting a real international perspective and solidarity. I echo Juana also because Juana is like my neighbor, paisana, and my parents left Mexico for the same reasons. I was born the year of NAFTA. NAFTA is a part of, that's all we've known our whole lives, right? And we've seen the damage and the way that it's just completely changed the landscape of Mexico and what it's done to our communities here. And so I would say you've shared what does this mean in terms of labor and capitalism? And within that, what does it mean in terms of US economic interests in general? What does it mean in terms of war, interventionist foreign policy? Because when we talk about the US Mexico border that exists in Texas, I think we're not just talking about the physical border that's there, but we're also talking about how the dynamics of that border get extended all over the world through financial and political policies like NAFTA. And Mexico, who's also not can't wipe its hands clean, right? Mexico is also funding, and US is funding an increase in border enforcement. And the thing that this current administration doesn't want people to think about is what kind of interventionist foreign policy is the US engaged with that force so many people to migrate. And so I would say in order to address the issues of our time, we need to look at the root causes. That means having this conversation around what's happening at a global scale, and for us to see what we're doing locally as informing what's happening nationally and internationally.
Absolutely. One of the themes that always keep coming up when they talk about migrants, particularly during the elections, is the criminalization of migration. One of the things I've noticed among activists, right, for immigration activists and whatnot, they feed into that trope of the criminal migrant versus the non-criminal migrant. And one of the things is that by crossing the border undocumented illegally, by definition, you're automatically a criminal in the eyes of the laws. If you look at it logically, there's really no separation between the criminal and the non-criminal immigrant. In my opinion, that narrative shouldn't be repeated by activists because that's just a way to create more division. I wonder what you guys thought on that. Anyone want to go?
I personally don't like using the word illegal because no one's illegal on stolen land. And a lot of European immigrants, right, our people had to cross a river, but their people crossed the ocean and nobody's talking about that. My grandparents were migrant workers, so they would go from Laredo to Chicago and then back. When the steel mill opened up, my grandpa worked there, but he didn't speak a lick of English. There were no protections for them at that time, so they inherited all that stuff. When they came back to Laredo, he was able to buy 3 plots of land where their family stayed. He had a house for his mom, a house for him, and a house for his sister. But even then, him owning houses, him owning property there, like, they still didn't treat him any better because he did not speak English. Him being able to vote because he was a citizen, like him being able to vote every election, even though he claimed everyone was a corrupto, he made sure he voted because for him, that was his Americanness. I've come across a lot of people, like in the Navy, there was a guy whose last name was Escobedo. And for me to see his name, I was like, hey, what's going on, Escobedo? And he looked at me and he was like, it's Escobedo. And I'm like, it's Escobedo, buddy. They're so hungry for that whiteness, that belonging, that's something that they can't take away from them. I've run into veterans like that too. And I think it starts when we're young. And even if you think about it, for Latinos, a lot of time we have to click if you're white or if you're black, right? Before you can click if you have any Hispanic. And most people won't click that black button because they don't want to risk being black. We're closer to black than white, and we should be proud of that. A lot of people, they're just so desperate, and I think that's how they keep bringing us back on the struggle because they think they're going to be accepted, and they never will be.
When you say about the block, the black, white, and whatnot, right? I'm Puerto Rican Dominican. I'm from Puerto Rico. So Puerto Rico became citizens of the United States in 1917. One of the reasons why was because of the need to gather an army was for the First World War. So the Jones Act was imposed on Puerto Ricans, and they became citizens overnight. And then right after that, they were drafted to go to the war for the First War. So Puerto Rico didn't, the first year since the invasion of 1898, when the Americans invaded Puerto Rico, until 1948, Puerto Rico didn't elect their own leadership. The first few decades, the island was governed by U.S. military generals and whatnot. They governed the island, then became administered by civilians. In 48, was the first Puerto Rican elected governor, which was Luis Muñoz Marin. Before his election, the census would describe Puerto Ricans as black and mulatto, the majority black and mulattoes, right? But when Muñoz Marin became governor, he advocated for that block to be taken out. So when I grew up in Puerto Rico, that was not a thing. You didn't put blocks if you're white, black, or whatever. That didn't exist, right? When I was growing up. Now, recently, because of this movement, particularly about the statehood, people want to be close to, in proximity to Americanness and whiteness, right? The statehooders, which is the movement to make Puerto Rico the 51st state, they implemented that again. And now in Puerto Rico, now you check the block of either white or black or whatever. But what's interesting about that is that in the 20th century, before that was introduced, right, the census would describe Puerto Ricans as being majority black or mulatto. Mulatto is a mixture between black and white, right? Today, when people check that block, it shows that the majority of Puerto Ricans are white. So I just want to throw that in there because you mentioned that. So I want to ask you the role of employers in this, in streamlining migration, encouraging migration. I know we got policies, and I'll talk about the policy in a minute, but employers, one of the things about migrants when they come undocumented, a lot of them already know where they're going to work. They already have jobs lined up. What do you think is the role here of these employers, particularly this big company like meat packers and stuff like that?
I'm just thinking about what the role should be because they don't really take up the responsibility. There is a demand for labor, and a lot of times, like you said, people sometimes come with visas, but also sometimes they don't. When people are working for these big corporations, they don't really do anything for the people that are working for them. It's very exploitative. They're not incentivized to adjust their status because they can just get more people. There's a lot of lack of accountability, like no one really holding them accountable because it's just cheap labor. They love the labor, but they don't love the people. A lot of the times they knowingly employ people without documents, but just blind eye to it because it's not convenient for them. And I know that the first Trump administration, there were a lot of news of these big corporations like warehouses, manufacturing companies, meatpacking companies, and people were basically disappeared and That was like the big news. No one really talked about it after that. Who knows what happened to these companies, but I imagine they just continue to hire more people. To them, it doesn't matter. They just see people as capital and continue without really caring, very dehumanizing sort of way. What they care about is the money. And unfortunately, corporations in general are just not held accountable in the US at all. When it comes to labor, corporations can get away with so much, and they do seem to have more rights than people themselves.
Yeah, and I would just add to Juana's point, immigrant rights are labor rights. And the question of what should these companies be doing, at the very least, is really pushing to resist the criminalization of immigrants and support the kinds of protections that immigrant workers and low-wage workers need. So much of what we're talking about is immigrant workers in low-wage jobs or precarious work. And for the last couple of years, there was a lot of workers applying for deferred action for labor enforcement, right? The so-called DALE. And that's completely gone now, right? Or not a possibility. And we're also seeing the erosion at a federal level of the kinds of labor protections that were in place so immigrant workers could uphold their labor rights and not be worried about retaliation, not being worried about, oh, if I speak up about the wage loss, even the trafficking that happens at workplace, then I know that I have this kind of protection from deportation or from the purview of ICE. And that's something that was off the table right at the onset of this new administration. I would say on the one hand, it's about what kinds of protections these big companies able to support. And then two is just there are examples of like other folks doing incredible organizing around labor that are holding some of these big corporations accountable, and that includes like protections for immigrant workers. I'm thinking in particular about the work of the Mockley workers or the Milk with Dignity campaign and the way that they've been able to push for demands, right, that hold these employers accountable as much as possible.
Indeed, because you have the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, right? Which was the Reagan era when he also did like an open legal path to legalization for undocumented people at that time and introduced what I call the temporary protectors TPS. I forgot what this S stands for. But particularly people that were in the war zones in Central America, the same war zones that the Reagan administration was stoking in El Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras. On the one hand, they were stoking and financing the civil wars. On the other hand, they were offering TPS to people at the same time. But this Immigration Reform and Control Act, it was supposed to penalize companies that are employed undocumented people, right? At the same time, like I said, they were doing path to legalization of people. But rarely the companies get held accountable. Rarely they get penalized for anything. The penalization comes in the backs of the worker or the migrant worker. A lot of these big companies, a lot of these agro companies, a lot of these meatpacking companies, they have lobbies. They have lobbies in DC. So they also support both parties. It's like a revolving window. Come in, come out, come in, come out. And just like people, they're treated as things to extract labor from and then send them away. And more people will come in, just like you guys said. One of the things that I also want to talk about is the politics of migration. I went to one of the events here in San Antonio, which was a Lancet thing, and they had workshops. And there were some people that were talking more at workshops. One of the speakers, he one of those detention camps of the first Trump administration. He came in from Honduras. He was caught on the border. He was applying for asylum. He was put in one of the detention camps. And he was there for several weeks, I guess. During that time, Trump was tough for migrants. One day, out of the blue, they all let go. You go to wherever you go, you're supposed to go. That told me right there, this whole migration thing is just a farce. This whole politics of stoking anti-immigrant anger, resentment amongst the people here is just a farce because, like you said, they need that labor. And those people have lobbies in Washington, those big companies that hire that labor, and they still want that labor. So it's not something they want to get rid of. All 11 or 12 million undocumented workers, they want a permanently vulnerable working source. What are your thoughts on that?
I think right now they just want to scare everyone into compliance. Once they get the number down to whatever they think is going to work for them, everyone's going to be scared. If we can't do what Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez did, and that's what I see now. I remember people telling me this, and I heard them, and I thought I understood it, but I didn't. They fought for all this stuff. They already won all these rights, and now they take them away so that we fight again. And we think that we're making this progress, but in reality, we just got back what they had. And like people are like, okay, we won, so let's take a rest. And it's no, like, we just got where we were. We still got to go more. It took a lot for me to open my eyes. And here in Laredo, like, I know it's going to take time. For me, what helped me and what grounds me, I grew up in front of the train tracks. And we were used to seeing, like, when the train would stop, at least 20 people jumping off the trains. My grandparents would always give them water and food. I remember the first time that it happened, this migrant was coming with his empty jug of water, and the other one was telling him, like, no, no vayas. At the time, I didn't really speak Spanish, so I didn't understand what's going on. But my grandpa looked at me and he was like, "Ve dile a tu abuela que le traiga tacos." So I ran inside. I was like, Grandpa told you to make him tacos. And she was like, yeah. And she looks outside and she was like, chinga, madre Jose. I had no idea why she was so mad. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that memory came back, and I was talking to my mom about it. She was like, they could have gotten arrested. It was illegal for them to be helping them. But my grandparents didn't care. Being instilled in me helps drown out all the rhetoric that these people are horrible and they're going to kill you and rape you. And it's no different than the Border Patrol that have been caught, like, raping and murdering people here. Why don't they see everybody else the same way? Or the wife beater cops. It's so easy to label these people a certain way because you don't want to be like them, because you want to put yourself above them for some reason. I don't want to lose my compassion or empathy, and that memory grounds me back. But people don't have that, so maybe that's why they're asking.
Sure. You want to?
I just want to say that we were saying, Maxine, about the rights that Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta fought for. I think that's why administrations like such an authoritarian administration like this one is fighting really hard to erase history, to have us forget that this already happened, that we've already won these things, that we've had things. And so I think what you're saying about scaring people into compliance and just forgetting what's possible, really fighting against, try to get rid of the Department of Education, defunding education, taking away resources. We've seen that too here in Texas with the governor who focuses on that quite a bit, banning books and all kinds of things that are really targeting the how do we erase the history that tells us that we haven't always not had all these things that they're making it seem like now we're really going to be controlled by the government. But really, for us, it's we know what it's like to live with these rights, and we can't forget that. Yeah, just the importance of that history and remembering what's possible when we fight for rights like that.
Yeah, I think this is a good note to pause at. Thank you, Cynthia, Maxine. Juana, thank you so much for coming into the show, talking to us, some of your time and sharing your thoughts and experiences with us. You guys have any last comments before we depart?
I want to say thank you so much for having me. This is so important. The work that the compañeras are doing is super important, and I'm down to support it any way I can. I would just say two things. One is there's a reason why the agricultural workers are not considered a part of the Department of Labor, but fall into the Department of Agriculture, right? To Juana's point and Maxine's point, this is our history. This is not our first rodeo. We've been here before. We've seen these systems before. And just like we're stuck in this moment with the development of so many harmful things, we also have a lot of resistance that's been passed down, and we need to tap into that. One of the ways in which folks can connect with us at Mi Gente around some of these issues is particularly around the ways in which technology companies and data companies are powering ICE's policing and surveillance in our communities. If folks want to learn more about that, check out notechforice.com. We just put out a report at the end of last year around the use of AI within the Department of Homeland Security, and ergo ICE. And also we just put out a report for the folks who might be tuning in from New Mexico about what that looks like at the state level with data companies. So again, thank you so much for having me, and folks can learn more about Mi Gente at mijente.net.
Cynthia, so that's one of the things that I wanted to cover also, guess when you have the time to, but about the No Tech for ICE. And I also wanted to make that relationship between the technology that's used here and the technology that U.S. military imperialism uses abroad, and how that connects to Israel and the genocide Israel is committing right now with all that technology together. Pretty much it's like a handful of companies are involved that they're handling all those three scenarios that I just gave you right there. But that was one of the things that I wanted to hit on. I guess we'll have to bring you back, Cynthia, to talk about that.
I just want to say thanks for putting this together and having us share what's going on. They helped us because we were one of the only cities to stop Trump's wall the first time. And when they tried to bring the virtual wall here with their information, we were able to stop the virtual wall that the mayor was so keen on doing here. But we're going to have to fight it again. But like I said, this fight isn't over. And if you're listening to this or watching this, if you feel like you're going crazy, you'll find your tribe. I've gone through this so many times. When you lose hope, you lose the faith that the people are going to come and join you and fight, because this fight is worth fighting for our generations to come after us. So just keep on fighting. And I'm so grateful to be in the fight with everyone here.
Awesome. Thank you. Juana?
Yes, I just want to say thank you for bringing us on and having this conversation. Very important during these times to continue connecting with each other. If we're going to survive the next 4 years and beyond, we really need to work on that and continue connecting with each other because we have to survive. I don't think there's a choice. We really do have to take care of each other in order to do that as well. And I think it starts with learning our history of resistance and finding our people. I think that we're here in this space, and there's many spaces that we can continue connecting and reminding each other that the tactic that this administration uses is fear and chaos, and that it's hard not to give into that. But knowing that's the strategy, I think that we can start to think about, okay, how do I conserve my energy? Where am I going to contribute and also maybe pull back a little bit just so that we take care of each other and ourselves so that we can continue moving forward, because we have to survive this next 4 years and beyond. And the way to do that, I think, is really staying connected and just being strategic about how we use our energy and who we surround ourselves with. Yeah.
How can people get involved again? Who can they connect with? And how can they get involved with Mi Gente work if they want to?
Folks can follow us on social media, Instagram, Con Mi Gente. We're on Facebook. And folks can also check out our website, mijente.net, mijente.net, to learn more.
Thank you. And again, thank you for coming and sharing your stories. Thank you for joining us today. Subscribe to our channel. We're on YouTube, X, Telegram. Look us up anywhere where you listen to podcasts. Please share with your friends and help us grow. Stay tuned to our next episode. Take care.
Money is tight these days for everyone. Penny pinching to make it through the month often doesn't give people the funds to contribute to a creator they support. So we consider it the highest honor that folks help us fund the podcast in any dollar amount they're able. Patreons is the main place to do that. In addition, any support we receive makes sure we can continue to provide our main episodes free for everyone. And for supporters who can donate $10 a month or more, they will be listed right here as an honorary producer, like these fine folks. Fahim's Everyone Dream, Eric Phillips, Paul Appel, Julie Dupree, Thomas Benson, Janet Hansen, Ren Jacob, and Helgeberg. However, if Patreon isn't your style, you can contribute directly through PayPal at paypal.me/Fortress on a Hill. Or please check out our store on Spreadshirt for some great Fortress merch.
We're on Twitter and facebook.com/Fortress on a Hill. You can find our full collection of episodes
At www.fortressonahill.com.
Skepticism is one's best armor. Never forget it. We'll see you next time.